So the first thing I want to do is I want to make it clear from the very beginning that the point of this video is not to get you to leave your church. If you're happy going to your church, if going to your church brings you genuine joy, then by all means, congrats to you. This video is not meant for you. The point of this video is more for me to share my experiences and share the information that I've learned and I gather. And in case someone out there is struggling with this type of decision, well, hopefully my information and my experience can bring you some sort of clarity. So I do want to start out by saying back in 2009, my family was invited to Seventh-Day Adventist church. It was a typical church. It was a church in which there was some good music, there was some good sermons, and because of that, we liked it. The biggest thing for us were the Bible studies. There was a very big emphasis on studying the scripture and understanding the context behind each story, and that's what really interested us. Eventually, we had to move from this church because we found a church that was much closer to our house. It was like 2 minutes away or something. We went to this other church and we found people that we really liked, very friendly and welcoming people. And we stayed there for a number of years. Eventually, I was selected to be part of the church leadership, and in these meetings, I sort of got to understand how a church operates behind the scenes. I got involved with church so much that there was the idea of working with the church officially in a very formal manner, you could say. But for that, I had to go to Washington Adventist University and take some theology classes so that I can be much more informed and ready for whatever the church needed. And I like this idea because if in the church there was already an emphasis of studying scripture, then how much more sophisticated would college level classes be? And so I joined the university, very happy, very excited, but unfortunately this is where the disappointments begin. A lot of the classes were not serious at all. We barely did any work. In some other classes, we received A's, even though we failed the final exams. I think the worst class was a class that was called a direct study class. This was a class in which you meet with the professor privately so that he can give you the assignments, the reading and the writing assignments privately. Throughout the entire semester, this professor never contacted me for anything. I think it was 2 weeks before the semester ended that this professor finally sends me an email saying to meet. And he tells me to write 3 to 4 paragraphs for a chapter in Daniel. He would accept my rough draft, give me some feedback, and then I would submit a final draft. So that's what I did. I wrote a few paragraphs on this one chapter. I submitted the paper. He never gave me his feedback, and I got an A for the entire semester. I think at the end of this, I graduated with a 3.7 GPA, and for me, it was just much easier to accept these grades and move on. I mean, what else could I have done differently? Could I have went to a professor and said, like, hey, you're not giving us enough reading assignments. You're not giving us enough writing assignments. I need more work. Or go out to a professor and say, this A that you gave me, I don't deserve it. Give me the C that I deserve. If you're a student and you're capable of doing that, then, well, congrats, you're better than me. I couldn't do it. It was easier for me to accept the grades and just move on. So after I graduated, I could now work with the church in a much more official manner. I worked alongside a pastor in two of his churches. This pastor was very influential in my life. I really appreciated him. I mostly worked with the youth group in each church. After a while, I think it was a couple months before the pandemic started, the pastor had to leave. He went to another district. He went to other churches. And we get a new pastor. In the beginning, things were fine. And I don't really want to share all the disagreements that I had with this pastor because it would ruin the intentions of this video. So I'm just going to focus on the real disagreements, the ones that led to me leaving the church. At one point, this pastor called for a meeting and said that he wanted the youth meetings to be more biblically based, more studying of the Bible, more sermon-like, more scripture reading. And I told him, I said, hey, like, these meetings are more for us to kind of just sit around and talk about our lives, kind of like a support where we could vent and where everyone could give each other advice. The pastor accepted that, and that was fine. Some weeks later, we had a whole discussion about the Black Lives Matter movements because of the George Floyd incident. And I think a week or so after that, in one of his sermons, this pastor said, I get it, but I don't want to hear about Black Lives Matter. I want to hear about Jesus Matters. I think sometime after that, there was a decision made where I would not be leading the Friday youth meetings every week. Instead, I would be leading them every other Friday. And sometime after that, I was informed that my assistance was simply no longer needed. And so we left that church. And because I noticed that this pastor wanted to control everything, I also resigned from my other position in the other church. And we left. I was not going to compete with a man that wanted to control everything. I'm not going to get into the conflicts he got into with my mom and other church members. I'm not going to get into the allegations he made about me. He wanted to be in control. We accepted this and we moved on. We went to another church. We were there for about a year or so. It was a very nice church. Again, very welcoming and nice people. And I think about a year after us going there, I was contacted by another church. This church had a very ambitious project in mind. They wanted to plant a new, modern, progressive, Spanish-speaking church. And I liked the idea. So I, went in for an interview with their pastors. And now for the following information, I have to be very transparent with the details of everything that happened after this. During the interview, it was shared with me that the salary for this part-time position was going to be $2,700 monthly salary. After taxes, it was going to be like $2,100. And so it was a month during the summer. I forget the exact month. But halfway during this month, the pastor calls me and says that I have been hired and that I am now officially on the payroll. And that he wanted me to come to the church so that I can get introduced to everyone as the new leader of this project. But the invitation wasn't for the next Saturday. It was for the Saturday after next. So around 2 weeks later, we go to this church. Very welcoming and energetic people from this church. Very nice. Everyone welcomed us with open arms. They introduced us and said this is what I was going to be doing. And that's it. The month ends, and in the mail, I get a paycheck for $1,100. And in the beginning, I was confused. I didn't understand why I had received this check. But then I thought about it, and after having conversations with someone that cleared it up, I had been added to the payroll halfway through the month. So $1,100 was sort of half of the salary. But all I had done was just go to a church and be introduced, and that's it. And that was enough to earn a $1,100 paycheck from the conference. I don't really have to explain why I felt weirdly guilty about this. I'm sure some of you would too. And at that point, it was easier for me to just accept the paycheck. If someone watching this is seeing this and say, well, I would have returned the paycheck to the conference. I would have called them and say, I haven't done any work yet. Well, congrats. You're better than me. But as most people, I had bills to pay, and I was the new hire. So I simply accepted the money and moved on. The months after that were very, very different. They were more dynamic. There were seminars that I attended, meetings held, there were plans made. So it was a much different experience. Now, as a side note, just in case you're not an Adventist and you're watching this, the way the SDA church is structured is you have your churches, you have your local churches, you have your local conferences, you have your union conference, and then you have your general conference. So a group of churches belong to one local conference. A group of local conferences belong to one union conference. And all the union conferences in the world belong to the general conference. Okay, so that's the structure of the SDA church. That's how they maintain so organized. Because of the nature of my work, I was able to have a lot of conversations with people that were employed by the local conference. And as silly as it sounds, as funny as it sounds, these conversations that I had with these employed people of the conference is what ultimately pushed me out of the SDA church as a whole in its entirety. One conversation was about a pastor who was assigned to a church that was divided. And after the pastor worked with this church for a while, the church began to grow. And it grew so much that the church leadership, or the congregation called for a change in the church leadership. When one of the church leaders found out about this, I can't remember if it was a he or a she, they called the conference, they contacted the conference and said, we need this pastor to be transferred out of here. If you don't transfer this pastor out of here, then I'm going to stop giving my tithes. I'm going to stop returning my tithes. Now, why was this significant? Well, this particular church leader was pretty wealthy, and his weekly tithes were several thousands of dollars. In the end, the conference chose to transfer the pastor out of the church. In other words, they chose the money over the pastor. Another person that I spoke to described the meetings they have in conferences as meetings that could be an email. These are meetings that talk about the church numbers and how the churches are doing and how it's growing, the tithes that are coming in, the offerings and all that stuff. It sounds nice and everything, it sounds organized, but how is that directly impacting the community around the churches? It's not. It's just meetings talking about numbers and things that bring no direct impact to the community. And the third experience that I had, which to some of you might be silly, but at one point when we were going to a seminar, the director told us that we could all meet at this Peruvian chicken restaurant for lunch. And when we were headed over there, we found out someone mentioned that it was the director's birthday. So there were some comments made that we should buy the director lunch because it's his birthday. He's working on his birthday. Instead, when we got there, the director said, hey, lunch is on me. This was maybe between 15 to 20 people. And that lunch was on him. I find it hard to believe that a person would pay for the lunch of 15 to 20 people on his birthday. So most likely he either put it on the conference credit card or he was going to get reimbursed later by the conference. And I think this is an unnecessary expense. And I know what some of you may say, like, hey, like, these are people that are going to plant churches. You know, the least you could do is buy lunch for them. It's not necessary. Honestly, it's not necessary. And this ultimately brings me to my biggest point as to why we ended up leaving the SDA church, which is how the conference handles these funds. Now, as a reference, as a side note, in case you don't know, the way the conference handles these funds is through member tithing. Member tithing is 10% of your income, okay? And how are these tithings distributed and used by the church? Well, the church doesn't use these this money. The way that happens is, I can explain it with an example. Let's say that I return $100 as my tithes. Of those $100, $33 is going to be used for pastoral ministry. So it's used to pay the pastors that are employed by the conference. $22 is used for education and the youth. $16 goes to the NAD and the general conference. $12 goes to retirement. $7 goes to admin support. $2 goes to stewardship, and $1 goes to church programs. So if the tithing goes to the conference, the union conference, and the general conference, then how does the church pay for its mortgage, rent, bills, and stuff like that? Well, that's through member offering. According to the Potomac Conference website, they suggest that offering should be 5 to 7% of your income. So on top of the $100 that I just return in tithing, I should also give $50 to $70 in offerings. Right? So now you kind of understand how a church operates financially, and how the conference and the union and the general conference operates financially. So since I was leading this project, I had a lot of conversations with pastors and administrators and directors and people employed by the conference. And through these conversations, I've learned of ways that the conference was using this money. Pastoral trips, conference meetings, and church retreats. Pastoral trips, well, what are they for exactly? The conference wants to use this money to bring a specific person to share a specific message. And sometimes it's not even about that. And I know, because there is one event in my life when a pastor told me that he was invited to go share a message in Orlando. This pastor couldn't go. So he told them that he was unable to go. And that should be the end of that. But the conference said, do you know anyone else that wants to come to Orlando? The travel expenses and the accommodations are paid for. Paid for by who exactly? Well, every conference gets their money from members, from their tithing. So let's just modestly say that the conference had $500 to cover expenses, to cover travel expenses for one person. This is $500 that a conference has received from other members, from a family, and is now saying, hey, like, we have this money, we need someone to come to Orlando and share a nice message. We need you to come from Maryland because we need to add a certain distinction to the program and be able to say that we've invited someone from Maryland, because it's not about a particular person sharing a particular message. It's just about having to bring someone from Maryland so that we can say that we brought someone from Maryland. See? Unnecessary expense. Church retreats, I'm not really sure what the purpose is. These are events in which the conference pays for a large space so that churches can get together and worship together. And this is more of an auto display of the numbers so you can go there and see all the other Adventist members and say, wow, I'm in the right church. There's so many people here. But how is that impacting the community exactly? Like, how are we helping the community by paying for a large space and allowing church members to go and do service there? It's not. And the reason why I say it like this is because for a long time, one statement from one of my professors really stuck with me. The statement that if your church were to disappear tomorrow, would your community care? So how are pastoral trips and conference meetings and church retreats impacting your community? They're not. They're just an extra step in this entire process. Regardless of all this, I stuck with the project. I had my doubts, but I stuck because I believed that, this was the best system. And then my schedule changed. Some things happened in my life and my schedule drastically changed. And I knew that I could no longer fulfill my responsibilities of this project. And so I told the church, I told them, listen, I can no longer complete the work. I can no longer complete the task. So in May, I informed them of this, and halfway through May. And so the church said, use the last 2 weeks of May to do a very thorough report of everything that you've done and submit it. And I appreciated that because they were very understanding. My family and I were really going through difficult times during those weeks. And so I did my best to do this report. May ended and I got a direct deposit payment, but I was not done with the report. I finished the report in the early days of June. I finished it, I submitted it, and that was that. That's it. Well, June ends, and at the end of June, I received another payment. It was the full amount of the salary. And so I informed the pastor and I said, hey, I just got a payment from the conference. Can you please inform them to remove me from the payroll? The pastor acknowledged it. He thanked me. And that was it. He didn't tell me that I was supposed to return the money. He didn't tell me how I was supposed to do it. He simply said thank you, and he was going to let the conference know. Just in case I didn't spend the money, I wasn't trying to spend that money. I kept it there. I checked my email on a regular basis, waiting for the conference to tell me something, but they never did. So I simply accepted this, and that's it. The month of July starts, the month of July ends, and I get another payment from the conference for the full amount of the salary. At this point, I had no other option but to contact the conference HR office and tell them directly. And I was very explicit in my message. And I said, I have done zero work for the church in July. Please remove me from the payroll. The person acknowledged the email, thanked me, and that was it. Once again, I needed someone to tell me to return the payment or how to return the payment, but no one did. If you're thinking, I would have returned it somehow, I would have contacted the president. Congrats, you're better than me. But no one contacted me. I put that money on a separate account. I kept it there for months. The year ended and I had to do my taxes. And this was income that I received. So I had to file it. I had to accept it. And that's it. After I stopped leading this project, we didn't immediately go back to any other church. We knew that if we went back to a church, that any church would have welcomed us with open arms. They would have been very happy to see us. They would have been very happy to have us back. Because most of the time, the churches have the best intention. But to us, going back to a church meant being part of a very flawed religious system. Their education system is careless. I mean, you have an institution, a university, giving out easy grades. And just to make sure that it just wasn't me, I contacted a person who attended my university years before I did. And he also had a similar experience of receiving easy grades on some of the classes. And I also talked to another person that went to Andrews University to get his master's. And he also shared the same experience of receiving easy grades on some of his classes. The church planting system seems to be indecisive. I mean, if all the churches that I went to attempted to form one big church, they would not be able to operate because they wouldn't be able to agree on what type of music to play, on how to worship. They would criticize each other on what they think about that. But does the conference intervene? No. And some of you may see that as a positive. Some of you may say, well, it's not the conference's place to tell you how to worship. Yeah, but at the same time, you have several churches in the same conference where one church is criticizing the other for how they worship, and they acknowledge that they can never work together. You have one church encouraging members to enjoy the Sabbath in many ways, and then you have another church establishing that there's only one way of enjoying the Sabbath. So the conference doesn't really care about how the churches worship. They just want more churches. They just want more members. And like I said, the conference's handling of money is very, very irresponsible. And I'm sorry if I'm putting too much emphasis on money, but my family didn't grow up poor, but we understood the struggle, okay? When my parents and I migrated here, we lived in a bedroom, and then we moved into a basement. After that, we were able to purchase a house. Unfortunately, we lost that house back in 2008. So we moved to an apartment. After that, we had to move back to a basement. It got so bad that we had to move in with my uncle, who graciously took us in. And after that, we were able to rent a house. And now, 2 months ago, by God's grace, my wife and I were finally able to purchase a house. I've watched my parents go to work every single day to try and give my sister and I the best life possible. And despite that, I still had to go to work and go to school at the same time to not get trapped in student loans. Now my wife and I, we have to work every day to give my daughter a better future. So when I see just how careless this conference is when handling money that it has received from member tithing, it's very disappointing. So after 14 years of being part of the SDA church, after 14 years of seeing things, learning things, hearing things, I started to see the SDA church as simply another Christian religion. And we decided not to be a part of it anymore. This was never a sporadic decision. We never made this decision from one moment to the other. It took us a lot of discussion. It took us a lot of weeks, and it took us a number of years to see all of this and finally say, we don't want to be a part of this religious system. Now, do we still believe in God? Of course we do. We still thank him every day. We pray to him for his grace and his mercy. Am I going to say that our lives are better after leaving the SDA church? I'll put it this way. When we were going to the church, God was blessing us. After leaving church, God has continued to bless us because God's love is bigger than any religion. That's it. Thanks for watching.